Alright, the frame I'm building today is the Twin Quad Frames CK Lite-SR. It's designed by two of my buddies right here in Columbus, Ohio. Went ahead and sanded down the edges here because mine were pretty sharp and I didn't want it cutting my battery straps. Here I'm applying conformal coating to the ESC. This is going to help with moisture and shock resistance. Since I'm going to be doing the rest of my wires on the inside, like I did here, I'm going to go ahead and wrap the rest, or coat the rest of this in conformal coating, since, as you can see, it's a lot harder to get into the board once the wires are over top of it. So I'm going to go ahead and conformal coat this, and then let it dry. Before I solder the rest of these on, I'm also going to go ahead and hook up the battery leads here. So we're going to go ahead and throw some solder on these pads. These are some of the biggest, wires you're going to use, so I'd like to really load these pins up. You can see that one didn't want to stick as easily because of the conformal coating, I'm guessing. And you can definitely smell it. Probably giving me cancer. Alright, we got that. The SpeedX also comes with the leads that you need to use, the right gauge, so here we are. I also see that this board, or this frame, has slots here, so we're going to use those to zip tie the XT60 connector down so that we don't have any tension. If the battery were to get ripped off or anything, we don't have any tension pulling on these connections here, these solder joints, and instead it'll be pulling against a zip tie that'll be pinned down right here. I get these connectors from buddyrc.com, and I really like them because they come with these kind of gray caps that snap over the connections. So even though I use heat shrink, I'll then run this back through over the wire and snap it in, and it just it just feels more secure, and it seems like it's putting less tension on the solder joint. Alright, there we go. Let's take a look at that. Cool. So you can see it's like pretty well seated in that connector, and we didn't apply too much heat and affect the XT60 plastic any, so that's good. That's a good connection there. I'm gonna do the other one. One thing you don't want to do is have this wedged where it's applying a lot of pressure, because oftentimes as you touch the iron to it and it starts to set in, it's gonna adjust, and you don't want this thing shooting out solder everywhere or pushing in too far, way in here. You kind of want it to just be sitting there on its own without any kind of pressure on it. You want to make sure those push into the XT60. There's little slots for the heat shrink tubing to go in, and you don't want to cut on the edge and not deep in there, because what ends up happening is it slowly starts to pull out over time, and then you get your connections exposed. So make sure it's set in there nicely. There is our connection. Don't ever plug something like this into your battery, because if these two things touch each other or a wrench, it's going to be bad news. So we're going to go ahead and just throw some electrical tape on the positive end, just so that there's no possibility of that happening. And basically what we're looking for is, I don't want this much slack of wire hanging out the back of my quad, but I also don't want it to be so tight that getting the cable in and out is a pain in the ass. So what we're going to do is, I'm just going to probably end up going with something like this. We're going to have it zip tied to the frame. It's going to stick out, and now we have room to come in and out, and this isn't going to be getting up into the prop line. I like that distance right there. What I might do is just go ahead and cut the ground. Had I cut both these at the same time or connected to a battery, it's going to arc and we're going to have a problem. It's a good idea not to be soldering over your components. If you drip solder into your motor, it's not good. I like to hold that on there until the wire just flattens right into the pad and it all becomes one big hunk of solder. Alright, so there we go. And we're going to zip tie this kind of down to there. Now I'm going to go ahead and finish the rest of these pads. Another thing to watch out for when you're stripping these wires over top of your board is that if you go with a gauge that is too small for the wire, you're going to end up cutting little strands of your wire off. And if you're stripping over your board, sometimes those little strands will fall in here and make connections that aren't supposed to be made. That's another reason why I like to do the conformal coating, is that it actually coats all those connections. And so if I were to have a little wire fall into here, there's a good chance that it's not going to actually get onto the contacts of any of these components, and I'm going to be okay. Pretty clean. Obviously coming inside and looping around makes for a much cleaner build, especially since we're going to have a lot of room between our two stacks. These wires aren't going to make much of a difference, so to have this hanging out the outside, I just feel like that's just not as clean. In fact, I'm going to shorten up this wire right now because I don't like how that looks. But some of my most, I guess, consistently long-lasting builds that have held up to the wear and tear of racing have been the ones where I come on the inside and then I just spread hot glue all along the insides of these wires, so even if an arm were to get ripped off and the motor gets yanked, it's not pulling on these solder pads. Instead it's pulling on, the zip tie or the hot glue that's all kind of wedged up in here. I'm probably going to end up doing that, but I don't usually do that until I've flown it a handful of times and I'm confident that everything's set up exactly the way I want, because it really sucks when you got to go back in there and do a repair and you've kind of formal coated everything and hot glued things down, and it's just really hard to kind of get back in there and peel that stuff off. So I'm gonna hold off on that for now. Alright, the SpeedX IS34-in-1 comes with two wire harnesses, one with some of these pen headers on it and then some without. I don't ever use plugs like this on any of my builds, so we're just not going to use that one. I'm going to go ahead and use this guy. Alright, on the SpeedX IS30 4-in-1, we have our 5-volt and ground, our 4 wires for our ESC signal, and then VBAT. The most important part is we're going to run power to our board, maybe off the battery, maybe off this 5-volt, and then we're going to run these to the flight controller. Alright, the flight controller we're going to use is the Omnibus F4 Pro V3. It's pretty much the board I use on all of my builds anymore. It comes with everything you need. Even if you're doing individual ESCs, it's got the built-in current sensor, it's got built-in Betaflight OSD, it's got my Spectrum satellite port, it's got the SD card reader if I'm trying to deal with black box tuning. It really has like everything that I need in a board, and it's the performance you get on it is just remarkably good. So this is what I use, so that's what we're going to be using today. I like to cut my wires as short as possible when I'm wiring this up, and I also like to run all the wires underneath. So if I'm going to power this off of the VBAT and ground, so if these were going to go here, I would absolutely run them under the board, put the board down, and solder them. And since this is on a wire harness with a plug that can come out, there's really no need to not go as short as possible. All of our wires are going to be hooked up to this one plug, and if we need to get back in there and work on it, we can simply pull the plug out, pop the flight controller off, and get access to this lower area. We'll go ahead and hook up our vibration dampening bobbins here. I get these from Powerflip RC. Alright, there we go. Got our bobbins on. Like this. We're basically going to run our power and ground underneath, and then our 4 wires to the ESC ports. We'll have access to our SD card on the right, along with our USB and our Spectrum satellite port. And then honestly, I don't use any of these other plugs. I think we have our beepers here. I don't use LEDs anymore. It looks like I'm going to be pinching some wires here with that connector. That's not good, because even though right now it might not do any damage to it, after vibrations and crashing and other things, that plastic connector might over time cut that wire up. So we need to make sure that we take care of that. What I could do is cut this connector off, as I'm not using it. It's not really a big deal. I can just cut that guy right off. I'm gonna go ahead and do that. Just make that a little cleaner. And there we go. Make sure we don't have any of those pins laying down throughout here. Alright, perfect. Yeah, there's nothing touching now. We're not worried about that potentially cutting my wires up. Could just loop these over and solder them to the top, but I really don't like any wires on the top of the board, so I'm actually going to tip this up. I'm going to solder all those right in from the bottom. Alright. We've got that all hooked up now. We don't need this wire. I usually just grab it and rip it out, but I'm going to make sure that everything works before I go ahead and do that. So I'm just going to kind of leave this, and I'm going to cut that end off. And just so that we're not sparking on something, what I normally do is just grab this and pull a little bit. And it actually stretches out the sheathing and prevents that little tiny bit of wire from being shown there. Alright, I use Lemon RX satellite receivers from Buddy RC. I know a lot of people like to complain about these, but I've been using Lemon receivers for a long time, and I have never had any problems. And I do mostly racing, so I'm not doing a bunch of long range stuff. This frame is going to be strictly for racing, so I don't need to worry about getting 2 kilometers or something out of this. I'm getting no more than 100 yards at any given moment. I'm okay with using this receiver. I think I'm going to mount the receiver in this space right down here. Obviously it's going to be too tight with it in its case, so I almost always decase my satellite receiver, so I'm going to go ahead and decase this. I'm using the Team Black Sheep Unify Pro. It's pretty much the only VTX I use anymore, so we're going to go with that. And the design by Twin Quad Frames for this light frame, they actually make it so it mounts this VTX very nicely, so that's what I'm going to go with. These two, we'll go run these right to the battery, and then we're going to run power, video, and ground to the video pins on the Omnibus F4, and then we're going to run the white wire, which is the smart audio, to TX6, which is like the second pin on this connector here. Got that connected, but I'm just going to look at it and make sure I can see that it's right. I can see that it's definitely right there. I'm connected only to the second pin from the outside. And we can do the camera side. So again, it goes video, power, ground. So go ahead and do video. So at this point, we should be getting video. If we plug in, I'm gonna go ahead real quick and make sure that we didn't create any shorts while we were doing that last bit of connecting. So that's what we're listening for. Power and ground. Alright, we are good. I don't know if you can see here, but I've actually abandoned the camera mount that was shipped with it, and I've gone with some 3D printed parts for the RunCam Micro. Alright, so I got one of the receiver antennas mounted here. Basically took a zip tie and zip tied it making sure that I connected it from underneath so it's set lower than the arm. That's going to reduce the risk of prop strikes, just being down a little bit lower. If I get a bent prop, it's not going to be coming across the antenna. And then I use one of these guys, the forever tubes, and heat shrink that over the zip tie to give it some extra rigidity and strength, so it's not getting damaged. Being careful not to damage these components because there's a lot of components up underneath of the black stuff. And I use the Furious FPV antennas because they're tiny and light. Okay, I got that on. How I'm gonna mount this is like this, and then this guy is gonna fold over like that, and then the top plate's gonna go on like that. So the way I'm gonna get this heat shrink is I'm gonna heat shrink from the end to here, and then I'm gonna take a second piece and heat shrink up from this end to here, and that way it's gonna be two pieces and it's gonna cover the whole thing, but it's gonna let my antenna come out the middle of the board instead of all the way to the end, in which case I don't have a lot of room to run this out the back of the quad. So that's what we're gonna do. So now the heat shrink's going to keep the SMA or the UFL connector tied down, and it still allows me to flex this guy up and properly mount it, just like so. Alright, so here's the final build. I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. The large stretch body gives you plenty of room for your components, and it's easy to turn out a clean build with this frame. I wish the provided camera mount would have been more functional, but luckily there are plenty of other options on Thingiverse or online if you want to mount your camera differently. The dry weight ended up being 295 grams, which really isn't bad considering I'm using motors that weigh 33 grams a pop. Had I gone with a lighter 25 gram motor, it would have sat closer to 263 grams. Also consider that this frame can take 5.5 inch props. The frame is designed in the United States and cut here in North America. I hope you enjoyed the video, and please consider subscribing. Thanks.